I'm Daniel Minty, a cognitive behavioral therapist, teacher, and writer. We often anthropomorphize death, making it into a figure wearing a hoodie and carrying a farm implement around. Such imagery, while arresting, can be problematic. I recently chatted with my friend and colleague, Annie Hanaway, about our conceptions of death and dying, and the self-defeating beliefs and avoidant behaviors that oftentimes travel with them. Please join us now. So thanks, Annie, for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our time together, and I've been giving some thought to the language we use to describe living and dying. And I realize that oftentimes those very words are somewhat unhelpful in terms of understanding the reality of what we're doing, because they suggest a binary system. Mm-hmm. They're saying reality is dichotomous. We're doing this or we're doing that. And that shows up everywhere in the culture. You know, the bad guy is wanted dead or alive. Nothing in between. It's one or the other.
Right. When in fact, like from the moment we're born, we're on the journey to death.
Exactly. That living and dying describes continuous data, not dichotomous data. So every second of our lives, 500,000 cells of us die natural deaths. Right. That makes 300 million deaths a minute, or 432 billion deaths every day. So
no wonder we're so tired by the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm coming to see human beings both as collections of molecules, but also as waves. And just as we'd see a wave crashing on the beach that started out as a single water molecule far offshore, moving in a new direction, so too we start out as zygotes, as single cells. And then each time a cell divides into daughter cells, telomeres, that section of DNA at the end of our chromosomes, shortens. Mm-hmm. So our telomeres are like our first birthday candle. And each time the cell divides, we lose about 100 base pairs from the end of each chromosome. And then when the telomeres are short enough, the cell does not divide anymore. So it's been helpful for me to think both as particles and as waves. It seems to capture more data than do the words living or dying.
Or even alive or dead. Mm-hmm. When you think about people you know who are breathing and presumably digesting and yet seem not really alive, you know, and people who are right on the edge of full stop, but are so full of life.
Mm-hmm. And people who have crossed over, whose words we hear or read, are very much alive in my experience.
Absolutely. And that's not even talking about the metaphysical experiences that so many people have of feeling the presence of somebody who's died, coming back to visit in one form or another.
That's right. This hard stop that we imagine between living and dying, we're imagining that. You won't find that in nature. You find a wave that starts, builds, and diminishes. And then another wave arises.
Mm.
And I think my understanding of living and dying is trending in the direction of waves on the ocean, that an individual wave has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the ocean is just the ocean. And each of us is that individual wave that arises and dissipates. So my belief about death and dying is trending in the direction of that, and away from something that I thought I was trained to as a young person, a belief that death is bad. Death is the enemy, which shows up, I think, everywhere in culture, shows up in medicine, end of life practice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What's your understanding of death at the level of belief? What is that?
That's an interesting question. There's so many levels that I could think about that on. I mean, at a very fundamental level, death is a necessary piece of the full cycle that starts with birth and ends with rebirth and continuation. And without death, there cannot be rebirth and continuation, whether you're talking spiritually or whether you're talking just in terms of look out into the forest and see what happens in nature. The tree starts as a little tiny sapling, it grows up, and then at some point it stops growing and then starts decaying. And that process is necessary in order to kind of keep the forest going, but the tree itself will drop its needles or drop its seeds in order to be reborn. And if it doesn't do that, it cannot continue to come back. But on a personal level, having just recently been in the process of accompanying my mother, I guess, right up to the edge of as far as I could go with her toward as she died. There's definitely an ingrained resistance, I guess, that I found myself coming up against over and over again. This shouldn't happen. She shouldn't die. And I saw myself playing that out many times. I had a really powerful experience where, is it okay to share this now?
Please.
So I've given birth twice with no medical intervention. So unmedicated, natural childbirth, whatever. And in the process of going through labor, there's at first the experience of increasing discomfort. For me anyway, there were a lot of contractions, and I found myself, for the first some hours, let me shift over here, let me shift over there, let's try the water, like push on my back. And at some point, it clicked. I can't get away from this. I can't make this easier. That's not the point. I have to go right into this. I have to go right through this to get out the other side and to get this baby out of me. And so it's not about trying to make it more comfortable for myself. That's avoiding the experience. It's not moving it forward. And with my mom, I felt so many ways like I was a midwife to her in her dying process. And I noticed myself really unconsciously trying to feed her more, trying to do all these things, obviously trying to keep her comfortable, but beyond that, I was doing things for me. You know, I'd catch myself making the bites just a little bit bigger. You know, here, take just one more little bite of this soup, or maybe we should do the ice cream instead of this, because I'm thinking, oh, well, that's more calories. And I would just catch myself over and over thinking, what am I doing? What am I trying to do? You know, do I somehow think that by giving her a little more food, I can stop this process from happening? I can somehow be powerful enough to make her not die.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to keep coming up against that.
Yeah. What a lovely story, Annie. Thank you for telling it to us. I was remembering sitting with my mother in the weeks before her death, and those same impulses coming up around her suffering and her care. And it seems to me we're expressing something that is probably hardwired to our DNA. First person I knew who died was a friend named Freddie. I was living in a row house with the Catholic worker community in downtown Los Angeles on Skid Row.
Breaking up a little bit.
Oh, okay. And we took in folks who didn't have homes, and they lived with us, you know, on this Zadaka house, it was called. And we had a cat that one of us rescued from the streets and named Mozambique. And Mo would walk up and down the hallway, and anytime there was a door open into one of the single rooms, he'd go in and check it out. And so one night, Freddie died. And we noticed that for the next couple of weeks, the door was open to his room, but Mo would not go in. And in fact, he'd run past that door and then start walking again down the hallway. So I don't think Mo had negative thoughts about death, but something in his structure said, stay away from that. That's not something you want to get too close to. And we now know that lobsters do that. If one lobster is sick, the others will stay away from it. House finches do the same thing. Even ants.
I had sister cats who did that, and they had been very devoted to each other for 12 years. And one summer, all of a sudden, Luna would not hang out with Surya, and we could not figure out what's going on. She would hiss, she would stay away, they wouldn't cuddle. And I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 weeks after this started, one day I just looked at Surya and said, she doesn't look right. She just looks, something is off here. She looks really different. Just all of a sudden, it looked that way to me. I took her to the vet. She had cancer that was everywhere. And when I explained what had been happening between the two of them, the vet said, that's not unusual, that Luna sensed or smelled or something, that something was going on, and just didn't want to be around. But interestingly, when it was time to let her go, the day that we had the vet coming over, all day, Luna just sat right next to her sister, just sat there. If her sister moved over, Luna would just move over, and she would just sit there.
Mm-hmm.
She must have known.
Yeah, I think we do know. And something in our DNA urges us to avoid illness and death. And so we're swimming up that stream if we're sitting with a loved one at the end of life, or if we are the dying person who is navigating that crossing over. I think there is a kind of challenge there that probably starts at the cellular level and then comes up through our thinking and our behavior, our relationships with each other. I've noticed that that can also get codified in culture. So in traditional Dine culture, Chindi is a ghost that lingers after a person dies.
Mm.
And in the Navajo Nation, out in the northwest part of my state, people avoid contact with corpses or with the things that that person owned or touched, because the Chindi are thought to infect, if you will, the belongings, the hogan, the home, if they die in a home. And in traditional Dine culture, you try not to die in a home because then other people can't live there anymore.
Wow.
So those cellular messages get expressed in cultures. And it seems like a lot of those messages run through our Western cultures. I'm not so sure about Eastern cultures, but certainly here in the West, there's an old history of avoiding death, dying, people who are dying, people who are dead, cemeteries, that kind of thing.
Yes, and I think that goes all the way down to socially, that oftentimes when somebody gets sick and it becomes known, if it's something where there isn't a cure, or it doesn't, it looks like it's terminal, people just start avoiding them. People don't want to talk to them. They don't reach out. They just don't know what to say, and they go away.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of right when somebody really could use support.
Yeah. When the chips are down.
Yeah.
There are practices that actually go in the opposite direction. There's a yogic practice called shavasana, of sitting in a cemetery, meditating in a cemetery, or even sitting on a corpse.
Wow.
And this would be what in cognitive behavioral therapy we'd call exposure.
Right.
We have our ideas about cemeteries or corpses, but if we want, we can experience the reality. And I actually did that when my mom died. I didn't know about shavasana back then, but I sat with her in her deathbed and put my hand on her skin in the hours after her death to take in the fact. And as CBT would predict, any remaining fear I had about death went away that morning. Because sitting with the fact of mom's death, I realized this is completely natural. This is as natural as birth. And I also realized it's not a thing at all. We talk about death as though it's an object. But what I realized was, no, death is the absence of something. Something was absent from mom as her body began to cool. But there was no thing at all.
It's very fresh for me. My mom died 10 days ago, and I had a similar experience, but a couple of pieces to it. One was very much the delineation between dying and dead was dying. She was there, and dead, she was absent. She was gone. And it was a moment. It was so clear that she was gone, and that what I was with was why they call it the remains. It was her body. So in that sense, I think there is a duality that even as it's a process, there was a threshold, I guess you can say. And the threshold divides one state from another state. And it may be on a continuum, but that's a milestone or a marker. And I also felt that I needed to stay with her body. And it was difficult for me. I didn't like it. I made myself look at her face a lot. And I was putting some clothes on her, and I made myself look at her feet, which were very different from the way her feet looked in life. And I made myself stroke her forehead and feel how the temperature changed. And I didn't like it. I didn't like that she was cold. I found myself wanting to hold my hand underneath her shoulder blades where the warmth remained. And I thought, I don't like it, but it's important to be here with this. It feels like a piece of humanity to witness and experience this. I don't like it because it's my mom, and I want her to keep living so we can keep having connections in that way. But it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. It wasn't, my instinct was sort of, this is going to be a terrifying moment and I'm going to freak out. And I didn't. It was just being there. It was the result of pushing myself to face my fear.
Yeah. Remembering what you shared about childbirth, that if we avoid being born or dying, we create anguish. And if we're willing to go through, I'm guessing on the birth side, because I've been born, but I haven't given birth.
Not in this
as
lifetime.
far as I remember, yeah. But if we're willing to go through and take it in, then it seems to me the fear goes away. There may be the sadness, the grief, sense of loss, but there's not unnatural negative emotion associated with giving birth or giving death.
Yeah, it's the non-problem. It's the isness of in that moment, it's an uncomplicated reality. And if we can stay with it rather than all the overlays that our mind wants to put on it, it's just a state of being. It's another state of being.
I experienced that sitting with my father as he died. He, like my mom, was in a coma much of the last couple of days of his living and dying. And I would just sit next to him. I had my hand on his chest and would feel it rise and fall. And I could hear what they call a death rattle,
Yes.
because he had fluid in his lungs. So when he
My
would
mom had
breathe,
that.
it was that rattling sound. And my siblings were there. And some of them were saying things like, oh, I just want it to end. I don't want Dad to continue to suffer. And hearing that, I realized, oh, I don't want it to end. And I don't want it to continue.
Right.
I don't have an agenda for Dad and I right here. We had my whole life of some pretty wacky stuff that we did, like jumping off of cliffs into rivers and the mountains, not knowing exactly what was under the surface, but figuring, well, we'll just jump. And we'll kind of aim for that dark place because it's probably deeper there.
Oh.
And now we were like jumping again. And Dad was going
Right.
first, but I'd come after him. And I thought, this is really wacky, jumping off of cliffs or off of living. But I'm really glad to be doing it with this guy. And there's so much he taught me by the way that he lived and died. Mm-hmm. So at the end, he couldn't talk, but he'd wake up and look around and smile. And I remember an orderly came into the room, and Dad looked up and saw him and smiled at him, and then motioned to us to get him a chair so he could sit down. And I thought, this is how I want to die. I want to be noticing who needs what and attending to that. But I think Dad had to show me what that looked like for me to know, oh, yeah, I think I'll do that too. And I'm looking forward to showing that to my son and to my grandsons so they can show it to their sons and grandsons. There's something that our people show us in terms of this process that I don't think I could have learned any other way.
Yes. I felt similarly with my mom and the qualities that she lived her life with that were the kind of thing that is not loud and flashy, but that was so clear and evident, especially at the end. It just got more so. Patience and gentleness. The gentleness of not pushing, not struggling, not fighting. Just, it's different from just being kind of a pushover, It was just like water, just being gentle in that way, allowing and being in the flow, and kindness and generosity. And thinking of other people, those were the qualities that even when all of her abilities left her, when she couldn't walk or talk or eat, she still had that, and she lived that, and she taught that. And I hope one day I can do that as well.
Mm-hmm. My dad was somewhat anxious most of his life. And when he got Alzheimer's disease, he became simpler and simpler. And he stopped worrying about stuff. And this big heart that he had was all that was left at the end. Oh. No more worries, no more planning, just loving. And it seems that in that way, death gives us the gift of taking stuff away.
Yeah.
We think of birth as giving us a gift of giving us something. And I think death gives us the gift of removing things. And maybe what you saw in your mom, what I saw in my dad at the end, was who they really are after all the other stuff, you know, got taken away.
It really felt like that. Yeah, it was so, I found myself so many times in the last few weeks just thanking her over and over for the gifts that she gave me by showing me who she was and by living her life by those qualities that were so compelling.
I have a sister who has a terminal illness, and she lives in a state where there's assisted suicide. So before Dad's death, she said to me, I'm glad I live in this state, because when my illness progresses to the point that I'm a burden on my family, I can just drink the Kool-Aid. And I told her, well, yeah, that makes sense. Just call me before you do, because I want to be there. She said, okay, deal. So then we sat with Dad in the last weeks of his life. And then I was visiting my sister the next year, and somehow the topic of Kool-Aid came up. And she told me, you know, Daniel, I've rethought that. And I said, really? What are you thinking? And she said, well, after receiving the gift of Dad's death, I would not want to deny my family that gift. So no Kool-Aid here.
Beautiful. She's not trying to get away from it.
Yeah. She's willing to be herself.
Yes.
And not stand outside and judge that as what she should or shouldn't be, a burden or compos mentis or whatever it is, to just be herself. And she's a shining example to me. Every minute of her life, she shows me what that looks like if you just be yourself.
Wow. What a gift to have that in your family. That's awesome. Awesome. I was thinking about some of our negative beliefs about caregiving too, that go along with our negative beliefs about death and dying, that caregiving is a burden, that it's a sacrifice, that it's you know, pouring energy and it's going in one direction. And how the experience of it was so profoundly different from that for me, that the more time and energy I gave into my mom and thinking about what might she like to eat, what could I find that she could swallow that will feel okay in her mouth, what can I find that might make her more comfortable, you know, this pillow or that thing, or, you know, getting her new soft pajamas. It was such a gift to me to devote that time to her and to love her in that way. It felt so clear and beautiful, and I got so much more out of it, I'm certain, than I ever gave her. So, and it wasn't easy. It was exhausting. It was hard work. It's very hard work. And it was mentally and emotionally hard as well as physically hard, but it was not a burden. And it didn't even feel like a sacrifice, because a sacrifice is like giving up something for somebody else. And this felt like I was so rewarded, couldn't be a sacrifice.
So I'm listening, I'm remembering when Dad was on his deathbed, I went and bought a Nerf football, which is up on my bookshelf here. Dad had played college football. He was a quarterback. And when I was a little guy, he took me out in the backyard and he taught me how to throw spirals. And he set up a tire with a rope and you had to throw the ball through the tire, you know? And then even as the Alzheimer's took down the rest of who he was, we'd go out to the beach with the real football and he still threw a better spiral than I did. Yeah. There was this muscle memory of what you do with this pigskin, and he still did it. Wow. So at the end, I wanted to play catch with him. So I got this Nerf football and I stood at the end of the bed and I said, okay, Dad, you ready? We're gonna go down and out. Dad said, okay. So I'd throw him the football and he'd catch it. And then he'd move the laces over. I think he licked his fingertips and then he moved the laces over. Then he said, okay, go deep. I said, okay, I'm going. And he threw it. And he was so weak that the ball made it almost to the end of the bed and then hit the covers. And he looked so disappointed. So at the end of life, there was this huge heart and there was this quarterback. And what I was doing was not sacrifice or service or anything else. I was just being his son. And I'm going to give that football to my son. If I'm on my deathbed, we're going to play catch with it. And then he can give it to his son. And we'll show each other how you do this. And show each other it can be as good as anything else.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yes, going into it with your eyes and your heart open. Mm.
And without thoughts of, oh, I want it to end, or this is the end, or all of these judgments. Just being there with each other. We sung Dad all the songs he sang to us when we were little. And he couldn't talk or anything, but he got a big grin on his face. We started singing, she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes.
I sang that one to my mom too while she was going. Oh, that's great.
We must be on the same bus, you and I. The one that's coming around the mountain when she comes.
We knew that already. Yeah, I sang her Amazing Grace. She'll be coming round the mountain. Give yourself to love. Simple gifts. Ode to Joy. And Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.
Sounds like the perfect discography for crossing over.
I hope so. It was. I hope it was supportive and nice for her. Don't know. But I figure when you fill your heart with love and you beam that love on another person, at some level, they receive it. Whatever may be going on with them. Or at least that's what I tell myself.
Yeah, that's my experience too. That this thing we call love is who we really are.
Yeah.
And is the ocean from which the waves of us arise and fall.
Yeah, so then, right when my mom died, I was having two simultaneous experiences. One was, wow, you're gone. You're really gone. The kind of surprise and the sadness. And then the other part was, imagining or feeling that now she was free to be love everywhere. She was not in this body, but she could be wherever she was. And I was hoping she was kicking up her heels and doing a tango and laughing and just, who knows what happens, but it's hard to imagine that for me, it's hard to imagine that that's the end of it, like nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's unimaginable to me as well. The ocean knows what she's doing, I think.
Yeah, when I was talking with Robin, who's 6.5, a couple of days after my mom died, he said, well, you know what I think happens after we die? And I said, no, what do you think happens? And he said, well, I think we go back up into the light and, we spend a couple of years dancing around and stuff. And then we come back down. We decide we're ready to be reborn again. So we're hoping that his gaga is dancing around right now.
Out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd want to share with me and our listeners about your understanding of this thing we call living and dying? What you've figured out about that as you've gone along, living and dying? And maybe any other connections in terms of the work that we do, cognitive behavioral therapy?
I guess I was thinking about how, as an only child, many times over the years, I feared the moment when both parents will have been gone and I'll be alone. And I think that is such a cognitive distortion. It's certainly a very different thing to live in the world without my parents living. But we can never be alone any more than we can ever be fully together with another being. We're always interconnected. And, the fear, I think, and I see this so many times in people, the fear of feeling the feelings is so much stronger than any negative experience of actually feeling the feelings. So the fear is I will be overcome and I will be lost. If I open this door of grief, I'll just fall down into the abyss and I'll never come out again. But I think that grieving is a lot like what you said before about living and dying being waves, a wave function, and grieving is the same. Grieving is being knocked over with this tidal wave and being tossed and tumbled, and then eventually the wave receding and us being left maybe tired, maybe a little bruised, but we got through it. And each wave that comes kind of pushes us a little bit farther along the path. if we let it, if we don't fight it. So I think that there are a lot of things that are the wave, and that's one of them.
Grief is such a gift. The poet William Merwin, who died a couple of years back, wrote a poem about that. And he called it the bass note that runs through human life. Grief, sadness. Not a problem, not something that doesn't belong in the score. It's just the bass note. And certainly losing loved ones, that bass note resonates in us if we're willing to let it. And if we're willing to let it, it's all we need. Nothing else will do.
Yes, it's the flavor in the stew that is essential.
When you were talking about living and dying, depending on each other, I was thinking of sides of a coin, that you can't have one side. You have to have both sides to have anything.
Right.
And certainly living and dying depend on each other. You can't have one without the other. And I think grief and joy are like that too.
Yes.
The joy of giving birth, bringing forward new life. The other side of that coin is the grief of letting go of that wave, relinquishing that. And I've noticed oftentimes my patients will struggle with grief because they'll have those negative thoughts that would destroy me if I really opened myself to that.
Right.
And then they suffer. And the suffering's pointing them to the work. If they're willing to open themselves to that side of the coin, they actually get both sides back.
Right. It's like instead of being destroyed, they get reborn.
Yeah. So we're seeing now grief behavior in a lot of non-human mammals. Seems like a lot of beings do it. And so it's somehow nature selects for that. When the elephant or the whale or the peccary or whatever it is passes on, the members stay with. And that somehow helps all of us with this process of living and dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
Well, thank you for sitting with me and with our loved ones, past, present, and future. I think we all sit together, and I have the happiness of knowing your mom and dad and can see them in you as I see you in your children. My direct experience of you includes all of those folks, and such a blessing to be included in that community.
In a place of honor. Yeah, I'm beyond grateful for that connection with you.
Well, I'll say goodbye for now. And God willing, we'll say, oh, hi, Annie, again sometime soon.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining Annie and I. I'll share one last story before I say goodbye. A wise woman I know was once asked by her Zen teacher about death. Anne replied, "It's like waiting for a bus. The bus arrives and you get on." Her teacher approved of this answer, and I do too. That bus has since come for Annie, and it will be coming for you and for I as well. I wouldn't have it any other way. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to this channel. I'll look forward to reconnecting with you soon.